So this guy is the one making Judas. This is the guy behind like BioShock Infinite and all of that. And my frustration with Judas so far has just been that they can't really clearly describe what's going on with it, like what makes it really click. Like, what is this narrative Lego thing? They're always like, well, you can kind of put pieces of the story together in a unique way to make it a unique story for you. I'm like, so like a Detroit Become Human type of thing, or like a standard narrative RPG? Like, what is this doing that's so novel and unique? Because it's giving me vibes of like Kojima, when Kojima was saying that Death Stranding was a new genre of game. And it's like, you mean like the FedEx delivery simulator, that new genre? Interesting. So maybe here he can explain it a little better.
Talk to me a little bit. I know you've kind of talked a lot about this. I mean, I think you first talked about this at GDC like 10 years ago, but the whole narrative blocks, the Lego blocks, whatever. BioShock and BioShock Infinite had their set of choices, I guess. And will you harvest the little sister? Will you hack the machine? Will you do this little side thing? Will you play the guitar? Whatever. But obviously nothing like this. And I'm wondering, this must have been a major complexity for you guys, especially as a small team, to have to... I always thought about it through the lens of Quantic Dream, right? Heavy Rain, those kinds of games where I'm like, damn, dude. Or Detroit was a big one when you actually could visualize the butterfly effect. And I'm like, this is impressive. You know, I imagine that it's been quite the feat to get this all together for you guys.
Again, I don't think anybody really clearly understands what he means when he says narrative Lego, because when you bring up comparisons like Detroit Become Human, which we all know and understand, he kind of walks around it and dances around it a little bit. So I feel like what they're doing in Judas is different, but I still don't know what they're doing. You know, it's like, and it gets me weirded out when the guy that's spent a decade building this game can't clearly describe what it even is. You know, that weirds me out. And maybe it's just because it's so novel and so crazy, we just can't fathom it yet, or it's hard to describe. But still, I would expect there to be a clear answer. So maybe here he's going to finally explain it. And today will be the day I finally see what he means.
Yeah, there was about 5 years of just figuring out the basics of what they, you know, we sort of built a piece of technology on top of the Unreal Engine, which was this Lego system, which pretty much every, there are some, the opening of the game is fairly linear. Then about an hour and a half in, it completely opens up and you can sort of navigate the surface of the ship, go where you want to go, you know, do the missions you want to do, make, you know, interact with the characters you want to interact with. But to make that work, we, you know, I had to sort of conceive this idea of the Legos where you would build, the metaphor is, for those who don't know, I did this talk, you could probably link to it. But the metaphor is that, you know, with Legos, the craftsmen in Denmark or wherever they are sort of create with Lego, they create a bunch of bricks, right? A bunch of primitives essentially. And you then can take those primitives and I don't know, back when I was a kid, they had like 30 of their, you know, maybe not even that, maybe that 20 or something of them. But the amount of stuff you can build with that, with those handcrafted elements was, you know, exponentially huge. And I was like, well, given the challenges that the games industry is facing and, you know, and the, you know, having done a bunch of these very linear games that where each moment was sort of a one-off, could you build and one-off's really cool because you can do really bespoke moments, but they're the same for everybody. Mm-hmm. Could you build a sort of modular set and teach the system how to build cool stuff out of the various Legos? And the Lego may be a line of pre-recorded speech with an actor. It may be, you know, that can be mixed and matched with other lines of speech that are recorded separately, but don't necessarily go together by design. They're not one-offs that go together. You know, a room that gets decorated with different objects and textured differently and lit differently and different encounters depending upon where the player is. Because, you know, I think I know we talked about this, but I got frustrated during Infinite because I had this stupid idea. Stupid because not that it was a bad idea, but it was way too late in the day to think of it. Like, I wish Elizabeth could have been reacted to Booker because she talks a lot about his violence. But I was like, oh, it'd be great if she could just get fed up with how violent he is and bail on him. And I'm like, then people kind of looked at me and I was like, oh God, we don't have any tool to make that happen. The game can't heal itself. So basically almost, you know, we had the Big Daddy and Little Sisters in BioShock, so there was a choice there. It was fairly marginal. It was cool, but it wasn't like you were, you know, could be like, oh, you know, screw this Atlas guy. I'm going to go off and work for Andrew Ryan.
Right.
when that happened, that when things like that change, that was the game telling you that it was changing. Or Elizabeth walking away from you, right? Getting mad at you and saying, fuck you, I'm done. And I really was like, okay, I want to do that stuff. And I really failed to do that on previous games, but I also knew that it was going to take a lot of thinking and a lot of time to figure out how you would actually build the tool set to do that.
So what he just used as examples are things he gave as examples when he met with Jeff Keighley and then the Friends Per Second podcast and let them try the game early. And it was specifically based on your decisions and actions in the game. What if we could do things like have a line of dialogue play, which is one of those narrative Lego, and have it play somewhere where it wouldn't play otherwise or in that context, but it only plays there because of something you did? Or could we light a room differently or texture it differently or put a different encounter there? I don't understand how that's different than what almost all these other games already do. Like most RPGs will have it. So like, oh, you chose to do this and now this character left it. Like The Witcher 3, if you try to seduce both Yennefer and Triss, they find out and they both leave you. They're just like, bye. You know, it's like what he's describing are regular traits of branching narrative games or RPGs. So if this is just a first-person shooter with more RPG mechanics, cool. Why are we pretending like this is some sort of groundbreaking thing that he spent 5 years building from the ground up? I'm like, everything I know about what he's describing are things that could happen in any other RPG effectively, you know? It's like, oh yeah, you chose to do something here, so the posters in the room will change. Okay, cool. Like, what's the big deal though? You know, like I just don't understand what the big hook is, you know? I think he means non-scripted. Well, so here he's describing how he wants the systems to be dynamic. He uses the term like the game has to be able to heal itself, which is an interesting sort of idea where it's like the player could break the game in a certain way by choosing to do something just outrageous, maybe killing off one of these characters or doing this or doing that. And then how does the game adapt to that? Does the game heal itself, quote unquote? Cool concept, cool idea. But again, how is that any different from what just a regular RPG would do? You could say it's not scripted, it's purely dynamic, so it's totally free form, which I think is more what he's trying to describe. So let's MS Paint this. Maybe I can like sort through my thoughts a little clearer. So if we imagine like an RPG might work like this, where you have one starting branch, then it splits off and it splits off and it splits off, and eventually you just get, you know, a whole tree, and maybe they cross over each other and they go different ways, but there's all sorts of branches that come off of it. And by the time you get to the end, there are a ton of different paths that could have occurred all along the way based on your decisions, right? And that's how typically you would think of an RPG working, is that you can kind of choose your own adventure and things will happen, but ultimately you're following along the same paths that everyone else has the chance to follow along with. You just are getting to choose which one of these paths you go. So like if you want to go this route, boom, you had one experience with the game. Or you go through this route, cool, maybe you go this way and then you go here and then split off that way. Cool, you had a different experience, but it's all just branching stuff within an RPG, right? What I think he's trying to describe is a system that is wholly dynamic, so it doesn't work the same way as this. What he wants are a bunch of individual little blocks that are kind of free floating in space that the engine can take and use. And then with the individual little blocks, it can rearrange them where like the first block will be the same for everybody. And then they can use the engine to move the blocks into a different order so you have a different experience than someone else. And the way they're doing it is by basically picking from this group and sliding them in based on actions that you perform. And in that way, you are building your own little narrative, right? That's the idea. And then some blocks won't be used for your story and your adventure. Others will be, and so everybody should have a unique thing. My question is just how this is ultimately different than what's happening over here. Because it seems like this is just a far more complicated way of achieving this. And if it's just a more complicated way of achieving that, that's indistinguishable from this, it's because it's more complicated, it probably ends up being worse. Because typically in games, when things get overly complicated, things get chaotic and break, and there's all sorts of other problems. But even then, like, even if it is just the same, it'll just feel like an RPG, but an RPG that spent 10 years to build and was put together in a way more complicated way. So my question is, what is achievable with the free floating way of doing it with individual blocks instead of kind of pre-designed pathways? What can be done here that's so unique from the effect that you'll have here? Because the designer, the game developer, knows that this pathway has been specifically calibrated and designed with these players' choices in mind, right? The game designer knows that. The player doesn't necessarily know that when they do X, it will have Y consequence. So for the player, the impression could be the exact same between these two ways of doing it. And so far, I haven't really heard anything described that couldn't be achieved through just traditional RPG design means. Like, everything that he's described is like, well, you can have a different encounter based on something you did in the game. Okay, that's true of many games today. So like, what is this specific thing or things that this game can do that no other game can do? And I just haven't heard anything, you know? Yeah, the end result, Andrew looks like a conspiracy board. Yeah, I'm like, you guys just need to think about this way. Yeah, basically.
It's funny because I was reading in, I think it was Ryan's piece. I told you last time we talked, I think, that I have this theory that these games are connected to the BioShock games, but you confirmed that they're not, right? Like, this is a standalone product on its own, right?
I mean, they're only connected in this fact that I worked on both of them.
Right.
And it's weird to be thinking about, you know, different IPs because they are, you know, I'm a particular person making games with a team. And, you know, we're going to bring some of our instincts from, you know, we're not going to, like, we don't flesh out all of our instincts and all of our creative impulses, you know, between products, but it's not a BioShock game in any way, shape,
yeah, it's funny, man. I also hate...
I mean, in many ways, shapes and forms, it certainly appears to be very BioShocky. I mean, like, we look at the gameplay footage they put up, and it's like, he's even said, yeah, in terms of gameplay, it'll probably feel very similar to BioShock because you have the gun in the right hand, and then you have the sort of magical tech effect in the left hand. It's like, in terms of actual game play, it probably will feel very BioShock like, but we're being pedantic.
The question, I hate even asking it, simply because if I were you, I would want that to be secret anyway, so I would just lie about it anyway, you know? Like, if that was... Now, let me ask you, as a creative, was there...
You're a liar.
Any feeling that you would want to connect them, or did you know from the very beginning that you were just saying, like, this is gonna be its own thing, there's no...
No.
See, and it drives me crazy how quickly people just pivot off of it. Like, he really didn't say much of anything in there that explained what's so unique about the narrative Lego. It's just, but people give up on pushing him on it so quickly, you know? So he describes really cool bespoke moments, but they're basically the same for everybody. You could build a sort of modular set and teach the system how to build cool stuff.
Build a sort of modular set and teach the system how to build cool stuff out of the various Legos. And the Lego may be a line of pre-recorded speech with an actor. It may be, you know, that can be mixed and matched with other lines of speech that are recorded separately, but don't necessarily go together.
Okay, so that as an example, say you screw over one of the three characters you're going to be interacting with, you betray them and start helping somebody else. Okay, then this system takes some different lines of dialogue and has that character tell you in a mini conversation they have with you, saying, I really didn't appreciate when you screwed me over like that. And then it attaches another piece of dialogue to go and help the sheriff who I don't trust. And then they attach another line of dialogue. And I know you may have been well-intentioned by doing it in the movie theater, but I'm not putting up with any of it. It's like, okay, it's just a more dynamic or a slightly more detailed way of doing a typical RPG system, right? Like that example doesn't sound that crazy or groundbreaking, you know?
By design, they're not one-offs that go together. You know, a room that gets decorated with different objects and texture differently and lit differently.
So he describes texturing it differently, lighting differently. Like they showed that in the little thing they did. Okay, maybe it's more like Duplo than Lego. I think you might actually be onto something there. Like again, my point with all this, just to be clear, like we're not trying to just nitpick for funsies. My point is, if you can't tell the difference between option A, let's just go, can I just go like, okay, if you can't tell the difference between these two designs, okay, so this is A and this is B. One is taking, obviously, much more effort to put together. B is way more complicated. They have the system where the computer is teaching itself to build stories out of narrative blocks that could be dialogue, or it could be you know, a combat encounter happens that wouldn't have happened otherwise or would have happened somewhere else. And it's, you know, it's taking all these pieces to put together a custom experience for the player. If the player can't tell the difference between that and a traditional RPG system where you're making some choices and then it changes the outcome for you, what is the benefit of doing B other than that it takes a decade to make that game versus this game taking 4 or 5 years? Like I don't understand what's the hook that makes this so special. Is it that it's just more specific? They can pull lines of dialogue to specifically mention that you did this in this place at this time, whereas in this case it'll be a little bit more vague. Okay, I don't really find that to be like ground shaking, but maybe that is enough for it to be cool. Maybe I don't know.
You know, and then RPGs are dead, right? And
Right.
Baldur's Gate, and the truth is that I don't think things die. People discover new expressions of them. Some things die, right? Like, I don't know, is the lute ever going to come back as a huge, you know, instrument? I don't know, maybe not. But everything, you know, I'm old enough to know that things you thought were permanent in the universe. Like, I remember as a kid, I was like, oh, you know, there's always going to be Sears, right?
Right.
And you never thought that Sears wouldn't exist. And of course, Sears eventually would go. Everything will eventually go, you know? And you have to become comfortable with that. Things come and go. As you get older, you start seeing things coming and going. But as a creative person, like, I don't have a huge illusion about myself as a great artist, creative person. Like, I am a guy who's incredibly lucky that I get to make goofy shit that people are willing to pay for and people are willing to pay me for. And I will find a way to make cool, goofy shit, hopefully in a way that people will pay me for, you know, until they drag me out. But AI, for me right now, at least as it stands, is an incredibly powerful tool for like QA, like analytics are something we do a lot of on Judas. Like, you know, we basically, when we test the game's constant. I don't want to bore your audience. If any of this sounds,
this is not going to be boring to the audience at all. Okay. I promise you.
So analytics are a major tool for us, where basically the game creates a massive amount of data when the testers play it about every weapon they picked up, every monster that spawns, because the game is so divergent that we have no way of you know, it's not like BioShock where you're like, okay, well, where were they in the level? Because there is no level in our game, right? It's all being constructed out of these smaller pieces at runtime. I mean, I call it pseudo procedural was the term I use, not procedural, but pseudo procedural. That is taking these individual bricks that we've handcrafted, whether that's speech or encounters or enemies, and it's sort of, we've taught the rules to make good encounters and good environments and good experiences, and it's sort of constructing it at runtime. But in order to understand what's happening in the game, we use a massive amount of analytics. So like, I find the value of AI is building an open-ended parser for like, hey, instead of like using a complex series of tools, just type in, you know, train the AI on the data of all this analytics, which is a massive, insane amount of data that no human could parse, and say, hey, show me how many times did people use the pistol while fighting this enemy while they were jumping in the air, right? You could, an open-ended query,
right?
And then the AI trained on the data set could come back and tell you that without having to have any set of special tools. That's really useful. The bug database, querying the bug database, because anytime you have a massive set of data, the AI is incredibly useful, unless it's hallucinating, which does happen, which I'm not sure that's a tractable problem. That may be an intractable problem given the nature of large language models. But I don't see it we don't use it at all for like purely creative purposes at this time. It's not, I don't think it's particularly good at it yet.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's interesting to bring up to him AI stuff. That's interesting. But I mean, even that example that he just gave with it is, I got the tablet. I'm not used to using it, but ooh, yay. But even this, like, that sounds much more interesting when he's like, yeah, it's pseudo procedural. The whole thing will be constructed totally independent of all of this. I think the best way to sell this game probably is going to be to like have two people play it and then go in and like show these two players only shared 12% of the same stuff as they went through the game. Their experience was that different because it was so divergent and so unique in how it was built out by these dynamic systems. That I think could be really interesting to people. It's like, wow, my experience is going to be that unique. Interesting. I like that. Even 50%, exactly, Jake. 50% could be cool. Or if it's like, hey, these two players decided they wanted to try both siding with this character, but they did it in different ways. And they shared 70% of the same encounters. But because it made smaller choices and did things slightly differently, the game shifted in that way. That could be something really, really cool. But it's going to be, I think, if you want people to get sold on this really novel idea or novel way of doing things, they're going to have to find a different way of selling it than just saying narrative Lego, because nobody really knows what that means. And even now, like, I feel like it requires speculation to decipher or to come up with useful ideas of what it means. Again, could be really cool, but I just don't know what that hook is yet. But I'm sure we'll find out as they show it more. He took my thing.